If you're someone who experiences a lot of anxiety, check out this next podcast on fear and all the emotions associated with it, from worry to panic to terror to anxiety, and learn more helpful ways to respond to those events. And also, there are interpretations of those situations so we can develop a better way to interact with fear in our life.
If you're like me, you know your mind can be your best or your worst friend. Our mind is an amazing tool that can do incredible things, but our mind can also create problems out of nowhere. Sometimes our mind keeps recommending the same solutions to problems even when they aren't working. I see this pattern play out as individuals try to overcome their anxiety, depression, or even struggles with pornography, using approaches that make sense but aren't very helpful. This podcast will show you how real researchers and clinicians are changing the way we approach mental health and reveal helpful research-supported principles designed to help real people with real problems. My name is Dr. Cameron Staley, and welcome to the Life After Series Radio.
Understanding the role of emotions in our life takes a lot of time. So I hope that you found some benefit listening to these last few podcasts where we focus on specific emotions, just so you can start to notice these playing out more in your life, the events that bring on these emotions, how they change our body, how they change our behavior, and what are the after effects, how they linger. So today I want to continue exploring another primary emotion that all of us experience, that it's inescapable. It's a really important emotion. It helps us survive. It helps us cope with threat. And it's probably one that we don't enjoy to feel a whole lot, and yet it plays an extremely valuable role in our life. And that emotion is fear. So even just saying the word fear, I could feel my heart drop. I'm not someone who loves being afraid in real life. I enjoy roller coasters that bring on some level of fear, but I'm safely harnessed in. I enjoy scary movies, not gory movies, but scary movies, because I know these are actors. These are a script. I can enjoy that from a distance. I don't like being scared in my real life, though. So I enjoy Halloween. I enjoy haunted houses. I enjoy that feeling of fear when I know that it's safe. And yet there's many times in our life where that feeling of fear comes in where it's not safe, or you may not be able to escape it. And that can be a lot more challenging to experience. So let's talk about the different variations of fear or emotions that are similar in the spectrum. And once again, this is coming from dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, where Marsha Linehan, psychologist, put together a module on understanding emotions and how we can regulate our emotions, cultivate more positive emotions. And one of the primary ways we do that is we start to identify what emotions that we're feeling. So just being able to be aware of them, labeling them, understanding them can really reduce the power that a lot of emotions can have over us. So let's dive into fear. So other really common words that we use to describe fear is anxiety. That might be the most commonly the emotion that I hear is people say, I'm anxious. I'm anxious about this exam. I'm anxious about traveling. I'm anxious about my health. And many times what people are trying to convey is they are scared, or they are experiencing fear. And I think as a society, we are getting a lot more comfortable talking about anxiety. And sometimes anxiety is the appropriate emotion that we're experiencing. But other times, anxiety is kind of a safer way to say that I'm scared. And that can feel a lot more unsettling than I'm just anxious. Often there's a lot of other emotions underlying that. So it could also be that you're just feeling apprehensive. That could be a more mild variation of fear, or a really strong one that could be tied to events or people is the emotion of dread. You could feel on edge. You could be frightened. A really strong one would be a sense of horror or hysteria. It could be just feeling kind of jumpy. hyper-vigilant, or a little more mild where you're just feeling nervous, that is a variation of fear. One that I don't often associate with fear is that of overwhelm. So sometimes when we've got so many responsibilities in our life or lots of different thoughts or demands, we can feel overwhelmed. And that could be coming from a place of fear that I won't be able to follow through on all these tasks, responsibilities, or get them done in a way that would be acceptable to my standards or what's expected. A really strong one that often prompts people into counseling or even ER rooms is that of panic. So if you've ever had a panic attack, it feels terrible. It feels like your heart's going to explode, that you're going to die. You can be sweating. Your mind is just racing. You're hyperventilating, feeling numb. It's a terrible feeling. So panic is just a really intense, really rapid variation of fear. If you're experiencing something pretty traumatic or awful, you may be in a state of shock or terror. Those are really strong variations of fear in response to those situations. Other ones that may be more subtle are feeling tense. So just feeling like your shoulders are bracing and your jaw is tight. Maybe your face feels tense. That could be part of that fear response. It also could be kind of a vague sense of just uneasiness, that something is just not sitting right. There might be some preparation. That's maybe a more mild form of dread, that something might be going down that you just feel kind of uneasy about. And the one that we probably experience fairly commonly that we may not associate with fear is worry. So often the things we worry about are not things that we're super excited about or going well or fun or pleasant to think about. We often worry about things that we are scared about, that we feel uneasy about, that we feel anxious about, or things that are terrifying to us. So worry could be another, maybe more diffuse, but kind of longer term variation of fear. There's also a lot of events that we can experience that can bring about this feeling of fear. So one situation that all of us around the world are experiencing now is that of a pandemic. That's new for most of us, and that's definitely not something that I've experienced before. So anytime your life or your health or well-being is threatened through a virus or natural disaster or loss of employment, the feeling of fear is going to come up pretty readily. Or being put in a situation where you have been hurt in the past, or were scared, or painful things have happened. So if you've been in an abusive relationship in the past and you enter a new relationship now and somebody's voice gets raised, it may not be a dangerous situation, but that fear response may be evoked because of that. Other events that can bring about those feelings of fear are flashbacks. So really strong memories of things that have occurred in the past that were pretty traumatic or scary. So even though that's not happening now in this moment, that you are safe, that those are memories from a long time ago, it's still going to evoke those same emotions of fear. Being in situations where you see other people hurt or threatened. And that's a big one for me, in a situation where a lot of the people I care about are impacted by loss of employment or health restrictions or frontline healthcare workers, where I might be physically well and safe, and yet I find myself worrying quite a bit or feeling uneasy or scared for people that are on the front lines, impacted by things that are quite scary, like a health epidemic. Other things that bring about fear on a more regular basis, this one might seem really strange, but it's silence. So no, my camera didn't freeze, my audio didn't freeze. That was just a couple of seconds of silence. When things go silent, sometimes we start to feel uncomfortable, awkward, feel pressure, might feel like something's wrong, something might be happening, and it's just the experience of silence. So I know a lot of people spend a lot of their time packing their schedules so they are busy and always running from one thing to the next because they're really afraid of slowing down and experiencing silence. Because when they do that, often a lot of thoughts come back, or emotions come back, or memories, or doubts, or insecurities. So sometimes there's a fear of just being present with yourself, with your thoughts, with your sensations, with your emotions. And silence can bring that about. So there's many times that I'm working with people in the counseling room, and there's a really strong need to have that silence filled. And I've learned that silence is probably one of my most powerful tools in helping somebody overcome the struggles that they've been having. So there's many times where I ask a question, and it's probably a challenging question or maybe a poorly worded question, but often I am trying to get at something rather complex or deep or personal. And an individual may not have an answer right away. And they might say, I don't know, or I'm not sure, or what do you think? In an effort to move past that uncomfortable silence. And I will just kind of reflect that back and say, just take some time. And we'll sit in silence. And you'll start to see really quickly how uncomfortable that is, even for myself, who spends a lot of time practicing sitting in silence in that discomfort. But for others, it's like, oh my gosh, like all eyes are on me. There's a lot of judgment. Like, what if I don't come up with the right thing? What if I'm unsure? And yet I found that sharing that silence with somebody can be a very vulnerable, connecting experience and a really powerful part of therapy and relationships. And yet it requires us to have a level of comfort with fear around silence. Other things that bring up these sensations are being in an unfamiliar place or a new situation. So a lot of people that talk about that I've got social anxiety, it really is that fear of the unknown or new people, or what am I going to say in these conversations, or fear I'm going to embarrass myself or be put on the spot or humiliated or not knowing the right protocol. So that can be a big one. And that fear can really interfere with some really meaningful things that we can engage in our life. So I know a couple of years back, I was interested in improving my physical health and recognizing that I probably can't engage in sport forever as my joints get a little sore and I tend to not rebound as quickly as I did in the past when I was younger. So I was interested in swimming. And the university that I work at, staff have free access to the pool. I thought, this is great. Here's an opportunity to go swim on the weekends or over lunchtime. And yet I found myself going into the gym and being like, oh, this is too scary. Like, I don't know where the locker room is. I don't know how to check in. I'm not a good swimmer. What if I don't swim the right direction? I'm probably going to be around a lot of other swimmers. Maybe I just shouldn't go. And I found myself like talking myself out of exercise because it was new. It was foreign. I was unsure how it worked. And as I started to realize that, it's like, whoa, you almost didn't even attempt to learn to swim, do lap swim, because you were afraid of a new situation. And I think about how common that experience is for many of us, that we don't take that opportunity to engage in a new relationship or take an opportunity or go to a new area because we're a little afraid. And yet that little bit of fear that may be just a moment of it or 10 seconds or maybe in a half hour could be enough to prevent us from learning something new like swimming. So I did feel fear for a little while, learning to swim. I thought I could swim, like I've swam for all my life, but learning to lap swim, like going down 25 meters and coming back, and keeping your head in the water for that long, I started to panic and feel anxious. And it's like, I can't do this. And then I would remind myself, like, there's a lifeguard right there watching you, like, scramble in the water. You've got buoys on both sides of you. You can just reach out. And yeah, half the time when you're swimming, like, you can actually touch. Like, there's no sharks in here. It's very clear. This is very safe. But it's normal that you're trying something new, and putting your face in the water is scary. So I have a lot more compassion for my kids that are learning to swim. I thought, oh, it's easy. until you try to swim for distance, and it's a lot more challenging. So I realized pretty quickly that this was an opportunity to improve my physical health, but also to get more comfortable with the emotion of fear, which isn't my favorite thing to do. But I thought, this is a really safe opportunity to practice a couple things at the same time. And swimming has turned out to be a really nice self-care strategy. It's improved my physical health, but it also helped improve my relationship with fear. That I can engage in activities that are safe and produce fear. And I can do that in a very gradual fashion and kind of talk myself through that. Other situations that bring about fear are being alone. So this could be walking alone, eating alone, living alone, maybe having your roommates or family members leave for the weekend and you are alone. So that can bring on some of those insecurities and fears that we had from childhood, but also just not having people to interact with or go to if we need help kind of compels us to rely on ourselves, and that can be scary. One that most of us experienced is being in the dark. So I remember as a kid, if I left something outside and it was dark, I would have to stand at the porch door and think about man, is my favorite toy worth it? It's across the yard and it's dark and there's these giant trees and shadows. I don't know. But I remember just running, sprinting as fast as I can to get my toy and then run back in. And my yard was safe. I lived out in the country. There's nobody around. There's no wild animals. It was just dark. It was scary. And I think that's why we have night lights. And it's still scary at times where it's it's dark. Maybe we should go in. So that's one. For others, being in crowds where you're around a lot of people, sometimes just having all the noise and movement and unpredictability can lead for some people to have panic attacks. And then when you are in a crowd, it can feel like it's really hard to escape or it'd be really embarrassing. So those can bring about a lot of fear. Anytime you have to perform in front of people, that's going to evoke a lot of fear. So that's maybe another side benefit of me doing podcasts and creating this Life After series and starting with Life After Pornography is I had to record myself many times, and they felt like these little mini performances, even though they were just 2-minute thoughts or a 15-minute principle or talking through an ebook that I wrote on acceptance and commitment therapy or strategies for addressing pornography. Anytime I had to sit down and record myself, even though there was no people present, just the thought and the realization that somebody someday actually might listen to this and watch this was pretty scary. So much so that I rehearsed scripts and rewrote them for many weeks and months. And now with these podcasts, these are a lot more informal where I don't have a script. I'm just sharing thoughts. I'm a lot more comfortable with that feeling of performance anxiety now. And yet I still feel it where it's I want this to be good and to do a good job. And yet I recognize that the lighting's not great and the audio is probably not wonderful. And I probably ramble and get on tangents sometimes. It's yeah, that's part of it when you don't overly script it. But I also feel like getting more comfortable with fear and letting go of some of those worry thoughts is pretty healthy. So these aren't the most polished podcasts. There's probably a lot better ones out there. But this is also kind of a practice for me getting more comfortable with fear and letting go of some of the control and outcome and just sharing some concepts that I hope will be helpful for people. For some people, leaving your home is really terrifying. So anytime you're venturing out, interacting with people, going to new places, and along with that, pursuing your dreams. So there's so many things that bring us meaning, that we care about, that are valuable. And yet, so many times we avoid pursuing those out of fear that they're unattainable, or that we might fail, or it might not be as great as we had hoped. And those feelings of fear hold us back. So I did have a dream of reaching more people, sharing some thoughts and concepts and ideas to improve people's mental health. That I really value doing that in a counseling, therapeutic context. And yet there are lots of ways to reach people, lots of free ways, that just sharing some thoughts. And I really hope that that's going to be meaningful. Also putting together detailed programs for addressing things like pornography or anxiety or depression. That's something that I care about. And yet, as I think about putting together my next program, and I have a plan for it, like this summer, I'm going to start to work on life after anxiety. It's going to happen. I've convinced myself that this is the next program I need to roll out, that anxiety can be so debilitating for so many people and prevent you from living your life the way you want to live and having the kind of relationships that you want, that I really want to share these principles with people that I found helpful in overcoming anxiety or changing your relationship with anxiety. But the thought of sitting down and structuring that and then recording more videos and worrying about the technology, it brings up a lot of fear. And yet it's something I'm still going to do, and yet I'm going to have to do it with fear. Fear is going to come along for the ride. And I just learned that the things in life that I really care about that are important, they're also going to be associated with pretty strong emotions. And some of those are fulfillment and satisfaction and happiness and eagerness and joy. And it's probably going to be fear and terror and panic at times. And I've just recognized, yeah, it's just going to come along with it. And that's okay. But that doesn't have to prevent me from doing things that I care about. So there's some of the events outside of ourselves that can bring about those feelings of fear. There's also many of our thought patterns or ways that we interpret events or ourselves that contribute or prompt feelings of fear. And a lot of these are beliefs that we had. So many times when I'm working with anxiety disorders, I'm using a lot of principles from cognitive behavior therapy. That's been around a long time. So I know I talk a lot about acceptance and commitment therapy and dialectical behavior therapy, but before those came along was straight up cognitive behavior therapy, where we are really just looking at what are the thoughts that you're having and what interpretations are you making that may be contributing to things like anxiety. This plays a major role in fear. So sometimes we have beliefs that you might die or that you're going to die. And that can be terrifying. Or you might have a belief that you're going to get hurt or harmed. So just having that belief can be enough to evoke so much fear that we're not going to go learn how to swim in the pool, even though it's safe and there's a lifeguard on duty right there. Or same thing like in this pandemic situation that we're in, there might be so much fear that we are not leaving our home, even though we've been encouraged to do so safely in a social distancing way, to get exercise and take care of our mental health, that we might be so afraid that we're kind of locked in. And I felt myself that initially, where it's like, the virus is everywhere, I'm not going out. And I have to kind of talk myself through, like, yeah, it's probably going to be in some areas, and yet we've been encouraged to wash our hands and wear a mask, and yet exercise on a trail when people aren't around and it's not crowded is fairly safe and probably pretty necessary right now. But just that fear that you might get hurt, that you might get sick, that you might die, that fear, often even though there might not be a physical threat, can be enough to hold us back. You also might have a belief that you're going to fail or lose something if you invest your time, energy, or resources. You might believe that you're going to be judged or disliked or criticized or rejected by other people. And that's a really common part of social anxiety, is we have these beliefs that we're being judged or criticized or rejected, and that ramps up those feelings of anxiety and panic and fear that prevents us from engaging in relationships. And there's many times I'm amazed where I might think that somebody is judging me or analyzing me or critiquing me, and yet it's probably likely that I'm worrying about that way more than somebody's actually judging me. And if they were judging me, am I able to tolerate that? Yeah, probably. But just that fear that somebody doesn't like you or may reject you can be enough to prevent us from dating or having tough conversations or engaging in things that are super meaningful in your life. You might have a belief that you're going to fail. that you're incompetent. All those things can prevent us from pursuing education or projects or promotions or relationships. Just that belief that you're not going to make it. So sometimes we fail before we even have the opportunity to fail in the kind of outside world because we've kind of convinced ourselves that's already going to happen. Our mind is that powerful. We also have the belief that people won't be there to help you, or you won't get the help that you need, or you might lose the support that you already have, or you'll lose people that are close to you or something that you want. You might also believe that you are helpless, or that you have no control over your situation, or that you're just completely incompetent. So as I thought through that list, I thought about I felt like, or I guess not felt, I've had those thoughts at many times in my life. And those are not uncommon thoughts. Those might be actually very common. And there might be kind of an adaptive value where if something is actually physically threatening, having a fear response is very adaptive to keeping you safe and alive. And yet a lot of the things that we engage in life are not physically dangerous at all. Like taking a class that you might be really excited in. But what if you don't understand the content as well? Or don't get the grade you're looking for? Or you may not be able to pursue that major, that career. That can bring up that feeling of fear. And your body's kind of programmed to say, whoa, fear is dangerous. We must avoid that. That's dangerous to our physical health. And yet attempting a class at college isn't. And yet that fear response is so powerful that we tend to avoid it. So I think our mind generates a lot of these thoughts and interpretations in an effort to keep us safe. And yet, in an odd way, it kind of backfires sometimes, where it prevents us from engaging in things that are quite safe, but they're things that we care about. So what I found is when I start to feel fear, I start to check myself and say, okay, is this actually dangerous? If it is, I shouldn't be doing it. So I've got a friend that enjoys cliff diving, and he's been doing this in the same spot since he was a kid. So it is pretty safe. We check the water, things are safe. I feel a tremendous amount of fear. And I'm like, I don't want to do this. This is dangerous. And yet in that situation, it probably is safe and it's okay to practice that. There are other situations where that cliff diving is not safe and you shouldn't do that. And you should listen to that emotion. But there's other situations where I have that fear response, like recording a video, where it's like, actually, this isn't dangerous to sit in front of a webcam in my basement and record some thoughts. I might feel fear, but it's not dangerous. So this might be an okay thing to practice with. So fear is an asset. It is very adaptive. It is very a healthy response to have. Not having fear is not a good thing. And we need to have that fear response. So sometimes when you're raising your kids, they don't have appropriate fear for walking out into the street. And we try to instill that fear, those cars are not just cute and fun. They could be dangerous if you're walking out into the street. So fear can be your friend. It can be really adaptive. But also, like with any good friend, you need to work on your relationship to it. There's sometimes you really need to listen to fear and avoid that situation. Other times where it's like, oh, thanks, friend, fear, but this situation is actually safe and it's okay. I'm probably going to do it. So as with any emotion, these are biological experiences that we have. So when we're feeling afraid or anxious or terrified or panicked or nervous or on edge, here's the physical changes that you might notice. You might feel breathless. You might be hyperventilating. You might notice your heart rate has increased. You might feel a lump in your throat. And that's really where the term anxiety came from. That it came from a French term that just meant the sensation of feeling stuck in the throat. That's all it was. And now we've used anxiety to explain all kinds of things. It's kind of gone way beyond its intended use, where anxiety first meant just the sensation of feeling stuck in the throat. You might feel your muscles tensing or cramping, clenching your teeth, or maybe even an urge to scream or cry out for help. Your digestive system might be doing all kinds of things. You might feel butterflies. You might feel nauseated. You might even have diarrhea. Those are some experiences you could have. Your hands might feel cold. As those blood vessels constrict, all that blood flow goes to your core and your temperature does drop in your hands. But also you might feel kind of sweaty. So cold and clammy is kind of an indication that you're having a stress response or a fear response. You might also have that urge to run away or fight back. That's kind of that fight or flight adaptive response to states of threat. We also express our fear through actually running away or avoiding things or walking really quickly or hiding. Or you might start to talk about things in a really nervous manner or start to talk really quickly or begging for help. Or you might become silent, where you're so overcome with fear you're speechless. Or you might be screaming or yelling, or your eyes might be darting around, kind of trying to survey your environment, trying to figure out what's going on and preparing for the next threat. Or you might be in such a state of shock that you're just staring blankly. You might start to notice some internal talk where you're talking yourself out of going to the gym because there might be people there. You might embarrass yourself and you might not be in good enough shape or not know how to use this machine. So you're talking yourself away of things that could evoke this fear. So we often talk about the fight or flight response, but sometimes when we experience really intense levels of fear, we engage in a freeze response, where you might feel paralyzed. So if we are ever attacked or assaulted, or things are really sudden, we get into an accident, you might have that freeze response, where you're not running and you're not fighting back, you're just kind of stuck, kind of frozen. And that can be really adaptive when we're extremely overwhelmed. You might start to cry, or shake or tremble. Your voice might start to get shaky. You may start to sweat, or sometimes when we're really anxious, we may even throw up. That our fight or flight response is in overdrive, and we're just trying to get rid of those contents in our stomach because this is not the time to digest your food. It's the time to prepare for a threat. So even vomiting can be that intense reaction to fear. And then fear has after effects, like all the other emotions that we talk about. So fear has the ability to narrow our attention, where we tend to focus really intently on a couple of things. And often it is that fearful object or memory or threat in front of us. We might be hyper-focused on noises and that it's dark outside and that we're all alone. So our view kind of gets myopic. It's very focused, very narrowed. We might have a hard time focusing or feeling kind of disoriented. Your mind's kind of scrambling. So that's a cue that I have when I start to feel pressured and overwhelmed. I start to do like a dozen things at the same time, where it's like, I got to check my email and check my phone, and I got to send this message, and I should research this topic really quick, and I got to make this phone call. And that's my cue where it's like, whoa, you're scrambling. You're feeling scared. You're overwhelmed. This is anxiousness. Like you're going 100 miles an hour in a dozen different directions and not going anywhere quickly. And your work's not going to be very good, very efficient, very competent. Let's take a moment and recognize that you're feeling overwhelmed, that you're scared. Let's slow our breathing down. Let's calm ourselves. And then let's pick one thing to do. Let's pick the most important thing. Not the first thing that you see, but you've got a lot of things you need to accomplish right now. Let's start to prioritize that. So for me, those after effects are really helpful in recognizing like, oh, I've been feeling scared the last several hours. Maybe I need to slow down. You may also feel like that you're losing control of yourself or your situation or relationships. Maybe imagining future situations where you won't have control. If we're really scared a lot, we may tend to isolate ourselves or even start to think about other times that we were scared or that bad things have happened to us. And that can keep that fearful state alive. That once we are feeling an emotion, that emotion wants to stay. And so often our mind starts to remember events or focus on things that maintains that. So sometimes that's helpful in a state. But for me, when I start to notice like, ooh, I'm starting to engage in the behaviors that are going to keep fear around longer, and I notice that my body's really tense and my breathing's changed and my mind is scrambling, okay, I know that fear is going to want to stay around. But I also know that there's some things that I can do to calm that response so I can evoke some other feelings of peace and calm and start to engage in things that are meaningful and valuable in my life. And that all requires being aware. So I know we've spent a lot of time on these primary or core emotions, and I hope it's been meaningful, but I also think it's really valuable to take the time to recognize what are some of these common primary emotions that may be happening in my life that I may not be that aware of, or aware of the situations that bring it on, or aware of the interpretations that I have in my mind, or the after effects that might keep fear around longer than it's useful for. So the first step is improving our language around emotions and the variations, and recognizing that, yeah, if you worry a lot, that might be part of fear. Or if you say, I'm anxious, it's like, yeah, there might be some fear there, or some terror, or panic. That might be a part of fear. So just increasing our awareness that we're experiencing emotions all the time. It's pretty rare that we're experiencing the absence of emotion. So sometimes when people say, I'm feeling numb or empty or nothing, sometimes it is shock. It's just really intense. Or there's other emotions there that we just don't have a word for yet. So improving our awareness, our language, and also our ability to begin to get more comfortable with some of these emotions in safe ways is really key. So in the Life After Pornography program and the other Life After programs I'll put together, I talk about the wave model. And with that, willingness is that first step. So being willing to experience these emotions that are quite uncomfortable for us, that can feel really scary. But if we increase our willingness to experience these emotions when it is safe, that empowers us to do so many things we want in our life. Anxiety can overtake us and start to call our shots and really reduce all the meaningful things that we want to pursue. Yet if we're willing to experience fear and anxiety when it's safe, it opens up so many doors and possibilities.
Hey, thanks for listening. Please remember to rate and subscribe. I know you might be facing some issues in your life or know someone who is. Issues like anxiety, challenges in dealing with emotions, or other compulsive behaviors like unwanted pornography. And I know it's tough to talk to people about problems. Difficult to stare those obstacles down that we face in life and to really know how to deal with them. It's hard to know what to say and when to say it. And then when that moment you finally reach out to family and friends happens, sometimes it falls flat. I haven't found many programs teaching effective strategies like mindfulness, how to improve relationships, and ways to address unwanted pornography viewing through research-supported principles. So whether you simply want to help with a problem like unwanted pornography, difficulty responding to emotions, or just want to understand the world of someone struggling with porn a little better, head over to lifeafterpornography.com and get in on the next training. There you'll learn the exact same strategies individuals addicted to pornography used to transform their lives by implementing principles from evidence-based treatment shown effective in research for reducing unwanted pornography viewing. You'll learn the secrets, the myths, the enemies to recovery, and the LAP framework for dealing with unwanted porn viewing that we call WAVE. If that's something that interests you, click the link in the description or just head over to lifeafterpornography.com. I'm Dr. Cameron Staley. See you on the inside.